We forgot Olivia.
All right, we're live. Can you pull up the live just to make sure that
yes.
at
Did
least
you share it with the right people?
Yeah, do I need to share? I gotta share it with you too, don't I?
It's fine. Hold on, baby.
What's wrong with me? She fed me halfway.
You can't do it now that you started. It's fine. I'll just watch it.
Yeah, you can.
No, you can't.
Hmm?
No, you can't.
That sounds like good.
See if you got the invite.
I tried to last week. That doesn't work because you've only shared it with certain people. She can't get the invite because you haven't shared it with her.
I just did.
You sent her an invite to watch a video that she doesn't have access to. It's fine. Trust me, I looked this up last week.
So why does it give you the ability to invite people on a video that they can't watch?
You can Facebook that much. It's fine. I can see the comments from you.
Send a video to somebody in Messenger from a group that they can't.
Yeah.
Allow viewers to request to join you on video.
So does like Scotty and them have the access already? Okay. He just can't add me now.
Right.
I think it's because you said you did want to actually.
Share broadcast, maybe? Did you, Courtney, is there an option for you to request to join?
Like when I click on this, it doesn't even show me that there's live going.
Anna's really cute.
Hmm.
It's fine. I can see the comments.
Oh, wait. Happening now.
That's probably just the event.
I didn't know it was the live stream in the event.
No.
That's what you might start doing is live stream it in the event.
Well, we don't want just everybody to have access to it.
You might need to make the event private so that they can request to join the event and then
Maybe. All right, let's get started. It's 7 o'clock. You guys ready? All right, let's roll. All right, we are on week 5 of Prepared to Reason's Evidence for Christianity. This week we're going to be looking at the resurrection of Jesus. Just to kind of give you a little bit of history of where we've been and where we're going. We started out with an overview of apologetics, what truth is. Then we went to does God exist? Then week 3 was can we trust the New Testament as a historical document? And then week 4 was the historical Jesus. So who was Jesus as a person? Right? Not necessarily, we're not talking about Jesus as being divine. We were just talking about a person, a historical figure. Did he really exist? Or was this made up? This week, we're going to look at the resurrection of Jesus. And then following this week, we'll have the fulfilled prophecies, which also are evidence for Christianity, pluralism, and the problem of evil. And then we'll close it out with the cumulative case for Christianity and any questions. We're going to do a lot of answering objections that week too. So just to recap a little bit about last week, we discussed the historical Jesus. Jesus was a historical person, right? He actually did exist as a historical figure. He's not just some myth. There are biblical and extra-biblical writers who confirm that this person named Jesus actually existed. He made extraordinary claims about himself, and those claims require a response. So he made claims that he is Son of Man. You guys remember us talking about Son of Man? Somebody want to refresh us on what Son of Man means? Hear it.
I'm just trying to think, did we actually like pinpoint? I feel like we went off on a rabbit chase.
So what? All right, let me say this.
Son
What?
of Man ties him to the prophecy of Daniel.
Mm.
I was gonna say David. So I'm getting D and D. That's as close as I'm gonna get. But so that's why he would claim to be Son of Man, was so that they would know he was the Messiah that Daniel was talking about.
Exactly right. So Daniel, years and years before Jesus came on the scene as a person, right, and took the form of man, Daniel had prophesied that there would be, or he basically was explaining a vision he had where there was a son of man, which means man-like, right? So like it looks a figure that looks like a man. That's what Daniel was referencing. Daniel wasn't saying that when Daniel said son of man, he wasn't using the word son of man to reference a divine being. He was saying son of man as, hey, I'm having this vision and I'm seeing this, what looks like a human coming. And yes, he is referencing the Messiah, but the term son of man is not a word or a term that means divine, okay? Now, when Jesus uses this word, when Jesus comes on the scene and he says, I am Son of Man, he's saying, I'm that guy that Daniel was referencing. He's referencing the guy Daniel was talking about. When Daniel had the vision and said, I see a dude, coming from the clouds, he really said, I see a Son of Man, meaning I see a man-like figure. And Jesus is saying, hey, that was me. So that's one of the examples of where Jesus is claiming his divinity. He's claiming that he is God, okay? Part of the Trinity. And those claims require a response. If, in fact, Jesus made those claims, which he did, we proved that last week, that requires a response, because now we've established that the New Testament is reliable in the sense of it's a set of historical documents that has not been changed. Then we're saying, okay, in that set of documents, we've got a historic figure who is making a claim saying that he is God in the flesh. All right, that requires us to validate what he is saying. Is what Jesus is claiming about himself really true? How do we test that? How do we verify that what Jesus is saying about himself is true? How do we verify that? Well, if he truly claimed divine authority, what do we do with that? We have to test it. How do we test it? We look at the resurrection, right? If Jesus says he was going to die on the cross and rise 3 days later, and then he actually does it, I have just a general rule that I believe people that say they're going to die and rise at a specific time again, I just believe what they say, okay? Because that is a pretty good indication that there is something supernatural about them, right? Would you guys agree? Like, if Avery says, I'm going to die a week from now, but then I'm going to rise 3 days later, and then that actually happens, I'm gonna think Avery's supernatural, right? So that's what we're looking at tonight. But let me ask you this, and I want you to keep this on your mind as we go through this lesson. What would convince you that someone did rise from the dead? Because we're left with a task, okay? And that task is proving something that happened 2,000 years ago, and not something we can stand here and witness out on Highway 98, right? So, what would it take to convince you that this actually happened? And if somebody does come up to you with an objection to Christianity and they say, oh, well, I haven't seen enough evidence to believe that Christianity is true. Well, you could really say, do you believe the resurrection happened? And if they say, no, I don't believe there's enough evidence for it, then you can ask them, okay, how much evidence would it take for you to believe that? And really what you're doing is you're exposing whatever it is that is holding them back from believing that it happened, and then therefore moving from that to putting their trust in Jesus. So be thinking about that as we go through this lesson. How much evidence would it take for you to believe that the resurrection actually happened? And remember, Christianity is not built on ideas alone. It's built on historical events. This actually happened. This actually took place in time, space, and matter. So we can verify some of these things, okay? This isn't just folklore. This isn't just some story that's been passed down from your great-great-grandfather to your grandfather, so on and so forth. This was a historical event that took place. Why do you guys think the resurrection matters? Why does it matter that we spend so much time, effort, and energy on the resurrection itself?
If we didn't raise from the dead, then what's the difference anybody else passing away?
We're worshiping something that's supposedly dead.
Yep. Correct. You guys sound like Paul, right? What'd Paul say? If Christ has not been raised, then our preaching is in vain and your faith is in vain. And as someone said, you can sleep in on Sundays, right? What would be the point? So that's why it's important. Christianity, the validity of Christianity hinges on the resurrection. Even if you, think about this, even if you didn't have a single piece of scripture, Christianity could be true. Okay? Think about that. Even if we burnt every Bible in the world, destroyed every Bible, Christianity would still be true. Okay? If it's true regardless, right? The Bible did not create Christianity. Christianity created the Bible. The resurrection is not symbolic only or merely inspirational. It's real historical events. We're going to talk about the minimal facts argument. The reason we go through this is I think that Gary Habermas has formulated a really coherent and easy to understand way of systematically looking at the evidence for the resurrection that everybody can really understand and comprehend, follow. So the minimum facts arguments must pass two tests, but we're going to look at these two tests and then we're going to get into what the facts are, okay? The facts themselves must pass two tests. Each fact has to be attested by normal critical means, preferably from more than one angle. The second test is the vast majority of critical scholars had to concede the probability of this historical fact. We're going to get into why both of these matter, okay? Now, that's not to say that if something passes these two tests, that it's 100% accurate. That's not to say that it's not. But it is a good indication. It's to give you reasonable, it's to give you reason beyond or truth beyond a reasonable doubt is what I'm trying to say. Test number one, what is normal critical means? Well, this is basically saying that there's multiple attestations, so the events appear in several independent sources or traditions. So like you have multiple people saying that Jesus was in fact crucified, that he had a following, so on and so forth. We'll get into some of that. But that's multiple people attesting to it. That's not just one source, one guy being on an island by himself saying that something happened, right? We have early testimony. The sources of the Gospels, these eyewitness testimonies, and the extra biblical documents that we have, they date back to the within a few years of when the event took place. We're not talking about the event taking place and then hundreds of years later this stuff getting written down. We have a manuscript as early as 100 years after the crucifixion that copy, that's when it dates back. And that's not just Christian scholars who are dating this this material or scribe back to that time. That's secular historians that say this document comes from this time. Enemy attestation. So why does this matter? Well, these are people that didn't have a dog in the race, so to speak. They don't care if Christianity lasts another day. They probably had rather see it die out than they had see it continue. But they still wrote down accounts of this guy named Jesus. Now, they may not have put their trust in him and believed he was who he said he was, but they're saying, hey, there's this guy over there that's creating a following, and the Romans and Jews are persecuting him, and he was crucified. And then there are people that are claiming they've seen him after he was crucified. So that to me carries a lot of weight. The enemy testaments carry a lot of weight because they have no reason to write this stuff down about Jesus. They have no motivation other than they're documenting a historical event that they witnessed, or that someone may be coming to them and telling them a historical event, and they're writing it down for them, similar to how Mark did for Peter, right? Mark wrote it down, but Peter was sitting there telling him what happened because Peter was the eyewitness. Embarrassing details. This is another huge, I guess you could say, factor in the first test. Nobody is going to make up embarrassing details to put in their own story, right? You're not going to make up these embarrassing details about yourself to put in a story. You might make up, like we talked about last week, you might make up something good about yourself that's not true, but you're not going to make up something that makes you look bad. And then the coherence. All of these testaments are coherent in the fact that they mesh together. They don't contradict each other. The language, the style of language that's being used matches that current time and location. There are certain words, there are certain phrases that were used at that time and location, similar to how we have, in America, we have certain words and phrases, even in the South, right? Like somebody says, bless your heart, right? Like that's something that somebody in the middle, take technology out of it, right? Like iPhones, social media, all that. If you didn't have technology, is somebody halfway across the world going to know that there are a group of people in the South that talk like that? No. The only way they're going to know that is either they have witnessed it themselves or they've had somebody that witnessed it tell them that, right? That's the only way. So there was certain phrasing that was being used that was coherent for the time and location. All right. And it's preferably from more than one angle, so we're not going to be biased here, right? We're not going to pick and choose what we want to use as evidence and then throw everything else out. We're looking at this from a non-biased perspective. We're saying, okay, let's look at all the evidence, put all the evidence on the table, and let's paint the picture of what happened from this evidence. That's what we're doing. We're following the evidence where it leads us. But you've got different sources: Paul's letters, the Gospels, John's Gospel, early creeds, non-Christian writers, testimony from skeptics, and even enemies. So you don't just have one side. We're not just using the Bible to prove that Christianity is true. Okay? The second test, emphasizing scholarly consensus, especially among critical scholars. So this is also, we're talking about, if we look at sources that are not biblical sources, we can take that same logic and apply it to scholarly consensus. Now, do scholars know everything? No. No, they don't. They know how to grade papers, apparently. But I'm joking if any of my professors decide to watch this. But no, the reason we care about scholarly consensus, especially if we're talking about Christian scholars, non-Christian scholars, is if they are agreeing on it and they are, I don't want to use the word expert because I hate using that word when we're talking about this, but if they have spent a large amount of time studying this, right? They've spent, I mean, there are people that have spent their entire lives just studying the New Testament. So you have these people that have spent a lot of time studying something, and they come to the same conclusion as someone else who has spent a lot of time studying it, but is not a believer, and they both say the same thing. That carries some weight, right? Especially you start having multiple people saying, yeah, you know, that's the conclusion I came to. That's the conclusion I came to. Christian, skeptic, agnostics, atheists, scholars from different ideological backgrounds. They're all saying that this historical figure named Jesus existed, that he was crucified, that the disciples sincerely believed they saw the risen Jesus. Okay? Now, are all of these guys right here, are they agreeing that Jesus rose from the dead and he's the Messiah? No. But they are saying that he existed, he was crucified, and the disciples believed that he was the Messiah, right? And that's important because that gets us like 75% of the way there. Now we just got to say, okay, what evidence is there that he rose? And I'll send all these slides to you guys at the end of the class. All right, well, fact number 1, Jesus died on the cross by crucifixion. Why do we have to talk about this? Seems like everybody agrees on it. Well, not everybody. Some people, including Muslims, don't think that Jesus actually died on the cross. Okay? In order to say that he rose from the dead, we got to say he died. So we have to cover it. It's accepted by Christian scholars, and then you've got several atheists or skeptic scholars that also will tell you the same thing. William Lane Craig's a Christian apologist, philosopher. Gary Habermas, all these dudes have like 3 letters beside their name. N.T. Wright, they're all PhD guys that spent most of their life studying this stuff, and they say that, yeah, it's obvious that Jesus died on the cross. Then you got atheists and skeptic scholars that say the same thing. They say, yeah, we agree. The evidence concludes that this guy, this historical figure named Jesus, started a movement and was crucified. Okay? Let's talk a little bit about crucifixion. You guys have probably heard some about crucifixion, right? What crucifixion is, the agony and pain that Jesus went through on the cross. Crucifixion was torture, it was humiliating, and it ensured death. The Romans had perfected how to kill people. I don't know if you guys know that or heard that before, but they knew how to kill people. They knew how to kill people fast, and they knew how to kill them slow. Okay? And you have a question?
No, I just was saying I didn't know that.
Oh,
I
yeah.
didn't know that.
Thank you for telling me that.
And
Sometimes we assume that everybody...
And I'm also glad that we're going over to proving that he did die, because that was when you said earlier, like, how we prove that he rose from the dead. I'm like, well, first we have to prove that he died.
Yeah, that's right. We do. So, maybe Jesus survived, right? Maybe he survived the crucifixion and was put in the tomb and then walked out of the tomb, and that's how he rose from the dead, right? This isn't a valid objection that people have. Maybe he survived. Well, historians overwhelmingly reject this because historians know that Roman executioners knew how to kill people, right? It's no secret. This was not a secret. You take Jesus, the person of Jesus, out of the equation, that is a known fact that Romans knew how to kill people. Failure could bring punishment on the soldiers themselves. So if you were the guy in charge of killing Jesus and come find out you didn't actually kill him, oh yeah, you're done. You're probably going to be on the cross. You know what I mean? Yeah.
At that time when people died, did they do anything other? I know that they wrapped the bodies. I remember you talking about that, but like, now they like remove organs or, do things to preserve the body. Like, did they do anything that would have altered him if he was still alive? And then they would have been like, oh my gosh, no, he's alive. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, there's no evidence that they did that to him. There's no evidence that they altered his, after they got him off the cross.
Like, what were like typical burial?
So like the women, when they were coming those 3 days later, they had like spices or perfume like stuff to
Start the embalming.
Yeah.
So,
And so when they got there with their stuff ready to do that to him, he wasn't there.
so most of the times now when we do those things to get those things out, it helps in regards of like the fact that when we do funerals, that it makes it to where it's more possible to do it and that there not be extra smells and things of that sort that happen at the funeral sites. Is
Right.
From what I've gathered.
Yeah.
The Egyptians were really good at it. The Egyptians were really good at embalming, preserving bodies.
And all that.
So it's been going on for a long time, but I'll say this, there's no evidence that that took place
That would just
in
really
this
help.
instance. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like, we could just speculate and say that, but there's no evidence that that
I think
occurred.
the question more is take Jesus out of it. What in those times, how did they handle bodies? I think that's really
That was my like secondary question, and Courtney was saying
Is
that
it normally
after.
be 3 days later that they come to do
Yeah, is it like would
I
everybody
didn't-
have been the 3 days later to get all the perfumes and stuff?
It depends on your status.
Yeah.
So like, for example, Jesus didn't even have a grave. We talked about that. Was that week before last or last week? Anyway, Jesus had his grave. The grave that Jesus was buried in was Josephus of Arimathea. I can't say that right. That was his grave. He was wealthy, and so he donated his grave to Jesus. But so it depended on there's no evidence that during that time they did any embalming or anything other than putting the fragrant, something with a fragrance to kind of eliminate a little bit of the smell.
So even if it had been 4 days and they had gone on that third day and done what they were going to do, it wouldn't have affected his body in a live or dead state, right? Other than
Correct.
making it smell better.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's all. Yeah, that's all.
Yeah. In fact, he had the shroud, which is the famous Shroud of Turin, over him when he was placed in the tomb. And I don't know if you guys have heard the Shroud of Turin. We could do a whole segment on that one day if you want. But the Shroud of Turin, anyway, we could talk about that for a while. It's an image of Jesus on the shroud. They think it's the original shroud or sheet, whatever you want to call it.
Oh, I know.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, it's
Cloth that was laid over him,
yep.
Yeah,
and that he folded up.
A lot of people do it for community.
What's that?
So a lot of people, like churches and stuff, do that in community time.
Like
There'll be a sheet over the top of communion.
I've seen that before, and I have never understood.
Silverina does, like they'll have the white sheet covering it. And
That's pretty cool. I've never seen that before.
Come and like fold it
I
up.
love it actually, personally. Like the symbolism, like the meaning behind it, I think it's awesome.
Yeah. So what did Roman crucifixion involve that we know? Okay. Well, they weren't amateurs at execution. We know that by all means. If you look at everything that was done, was documented, that was done to Jesus, it's pretty clear that they had this down to a science. In fact, some victims wouldn't even make it to the cross. So think about that for a second. You are going to get crucified for whatever crime you committed or whatever the Romans saw fit for you to be crucified. And you die before you even make it to the cross. That's how excruciating this process really was. the first thing we're going to look at is the severe flogging. So flogging used a thing called a lagrum, and it's a whip. It had a wooden handle, leather straps on it, and at the end of it, it had fragments of bone, and then sometimes pieces of metal, whether it be copper or lead or whatever they had at the time. And it was multiple strands of it. And they would literally tie you up, and they would whip you with this thing. I mean, you can see the graphic picture here. And they would beat you from your shoulders to your heels. It caused deep lacerations, so deep cuts, massive bleeding, exposure of tissue and bone, extreme physical weakness. So if you look at all this, and some of this is going to be kind of graphic and very detailed, and I want you guys to think about this. If it is true, and that's what we're going to try to establish tonight. If it's true that Jesus really is the Messiah because he rose from the dead, think about, as we go through this, what he endured for us. Okay? It's pretty insane. Like, most of us wouldn't even be able to make it through this. And he hasn't even started carrying the cross. You know what I'm saying? So, it's an eye-opener. It was an eye-opener to me when I put this together. From the flogging, and not just from the flogging, from the crucifixion, the whole process, you have a lot of blood loss and shock. You guys are familiar with that. You lose a lot of blood, you start going into shock, right? Your blood pressure starts falling. When your blood pressure starts falling and you're bleeding, your blood is what carries oxygen throughout your body. So if you're losing blood, your body's not getting oxygen, means your organs aren't getting oxygen. Weakness, you collapse, accelerated shock. Hypovolemic shock is from blood loss. Traumatic shock is from extensive injuries. So the impact over and over of this, flogging, and then pain-induced shock from extreme suffering. So, a lot of this is happening before the guy's even on the cross. All right? Exhaustion. Crucifixion imposed overwhelming physical exhaustion. Sleep loss, obviously he's not sleeping, right? Severe pain, dehydration, loss of blood, muscle failure, and he's out in the elements. It could have been 110 degrees out there. I spent quite some time in the Middle East. I was in Qatar, and there was days out there in the middle of summer that it would get up in 115 degrees. That's not an exaggeration. And you imagine you've been beaten. Most of your back, the back of your body, flesh is torn off, right? You're basically just one big, strawberry on your back. Bone is exposed. And so this is what Jesus had to endure. All right? Suffocation.
On the last one, what was the part that has the twisting part? What's it talking about? The arrows on the left right to the left of the first picture.
Pectoral muscles,
Right here.
Yeah.
like how he breathes.
Oh, yeah. So when you're in that position, it puts a strain on your rib cage. So literally, in order for you to exhale, so inhale, exhale, right? In order for you to exhale on the cross, you would literally have to push up with your legs to be able to exhale, to take a breath. So there's your inhalation, exhalation. So that's when you exhale. That's what it's showing right there, is your weight goes down when you're inhaling, and then you have to push your weight up on the cross whenever you're exhaling.
There's a guy that goes around, and I assume he's a doctor, and he tells the doctor's point, shows everything from a doctor's point.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. He's a physician. Yeah.
So basically, if you couldn't pull yourself up and push yourself up, pretty much just
That's it, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
is that?
Yep.
Indeed.
Suffocation. So in fact, the suffocation aspect of the crucifixion is one of the most widely accepted forms of death. And in a sense of, if we were to sit here and say, okay, how did Jesus actually, like, what caused his, not what caused it, but what did he die by on the cross, right? Like, was it bleeding out? Was it shock? Was it, suffocation? Most physicians will say he actually died by suffocation, right? You just become so weak that you physically can't you push yourself up anymore to breathe. The chest muscles become strained. It becomes increasingly difficult to breathe. And then, you have to push up to exhale. Prolonged trauma and eventual death. The crucifixion was not a quick execution. It was a prolonged torture. It was designed that way. It was designed to be an excruciating, lengthy death. I mean, they may have flogged Jesus for hours, but we don't know. You know what I'm saying? Like they had to do it long enough to basically cover from his head to his toe. You have open wounds, nerve damage, exposure, dehydration, respiratory distress, and severe pain. So, I think it's safe to say that this historical figure called Jesus really did die on the cross. Okay? Now, if for some reason you thought that if you, after hearing about biblical and extra biblical testimonies that Jesus died on the cross, after seeing all of this, you still aren't convinced that he would have died, then he gets, and I didn't include it on the slides, but then he gets a spear stabbed in his side. Okay? And there's testimony that there was water and blood that came out. Or the reason there's water and blood that comes out is because at that point your body is shutting down, your organs are failing, and I forget the scientific term for it, but it's a sign that you're basically done. And that person, that Roman soldier that was in charge of stabbing him in the side, that's the guy that was going to be held accountable if Jesus wasn't dead. So, yeah, they're going to make sure he was dead, right?
They probably knew the right places to stab, too.
Yeah, exactly. They were not, this wasn't the first time they had performed a crucifixion. Another thing I didn't add on here because I just didn't want to spend the whole night talking about this. You could, it's very interesting. We actually have archaeological evidence of pieces of feet, like foot bones, with nails driven through them from crucifixions. However, we always see a picture depicted of Jesus where it's like one foot is on top of the other and he's got a nail driven through both feet from top to bottom. You guys seen that before? Probably every picture you look up or see, that's what you see. But historians are saying it's likely that, and I'm not claiming this as like absolute fact, I'm just giving you the information that I have. Historians are saying that it's very likely that's not how Jesus' feet were nailed to the cross. It's very likely that his feet were on each side of the cross and there was a nail driven through his heel bone into the cross. Because the only archaeological findings we have from that time are heel bones, pieces of the feet with a nail through the heel going from, one side to the other, not through the top of the foot going down. So just keep that in mind too. I mean, I can't imagine, can you imagine like before you're raised up on the cross, I mean, you've dealt with flogging, you've had to carry the cross, you are laid on this cross and nailed to it. And part of that nailing is they're driving these big stakes through your heel bone into the side of the cross. And then they put a crown of thorns on your head, and the thorns are like this long and razor sharp on your head. And then they raise you up on the cross. And that's when you start having to hold yourself up to breathe and pull on your hand or your wrist where the stakes were. It's pretty excruciating just to think about. So, supporting evidence for the crucifixion, we know it was brutal and effective. Tacitus confirms the execution itself. Josephus references it. Gospels report it. And virtually nobody in mainstream scholarship argue that he survived the crucifixion, right? You have some people that do, but they're not what I would say is reputable sources. All right. So that was fact number 1. Let's go back to fact number 1 is, did Jesus die by crucifixion? Okay. Fact number 2, the tomb was empty. So Jesus is in the tomb. Okay. Jesus' tomb was found empty by a group of women. Why is this evidence for the fact that it was empty?
Women's opinions and dogs weren't important. And nobody listened to women. And a man would have rather taken the recognition that they found the tomb empty.
Exactly. It wasn't the cultural norm, and it's an embarrassing detail because what it points out is the men were hiding. So like, this is going down. I'm laughing, but it's not funny, but this is going down. Jesus is getting crucified. The men go into hiding, and the women go to put scents and flowers on Jesus' grave, right? Essentially. Like, so that wouldn't have been written down if that wasn't the case. Okay? They weren't a reputable source of relaying information as well. The Jewish response was that the disciples came during the night and stole him while they were sleeping. Why would that have been the response if the body was there? Nobody's going to accuse someone else of stealing the body if the body's there, right? I mean, all they would have had to do is say, here's the body. You know what I mean? They couldn't do that because it wasn't there. So, one of two things had to happen. Either Jesus really did rise from the dead or somebody did steal the body. Okay, and we're going to get into why it's not plausible that someone stole a body. And we know the exact location of the tomb. And guess what? There's no body there. Right? So Jesus isn't in the grave regardless of what you believe or think about this. The body's not there. Archaeological support. Like we talked about, wealthier Jews in the first century used rock-cut tombs like the one described for Joseph of Arimathea. So Joseph lended his tomb for Jesus because Jesus didn't have a tomb. And a lot of times during this time, people had family tombs, right? They would share tombs. They would put a body in there. It would decay. It would end up just being bones. And they would take those bones. They might put them in a bone box. So people had bone boxes. They were family bone boxes. What?
That's her goal,
A bone box? Is it because it sounds like a boom box? Bodies were often wrapped with spices and buried quickly before Sabbath observance. In a large rolling stone tomb, entrance is historically plausible because that was used during that time. Okay, this is just how archaeology lines up with the crucifixion, the death, burial, and resurrection is what I'm saying. It's not like archaeologists have said, well, they didn't use tombs during that time. or they didn't use stones in front of the tombs during that time, or they used great, you know what I mean? So all of the evidence is lining up, okay? Fact number 3, the disciples believed they saw the risen Jesus. They genuinely believed they experienced appearances of Jesus. You got multiple appearance tradition, early creeds, we talked about this last week, and then the transformation of disciples. So did the disciples actually steal the body? That's really the question, right? Nobody else could steal the body. In fact, I don't think anybody could have stolen the body, because if the Roman guards watching the tomb, okay? Because they didn't want anybody messing with the body. Yeah. Yeah, they took.
One more question.
What's that?
I have one more question. How were the women planning to get into the tomb?
Were they going to actually get in the tomb to do anything with the body? Like, to put this.
Because one of the arguments is like, well, the rock was really heavy, so like, he had to be divine to be able to move the rock himself out of the way.
I don't understand your question.
So when the 3 women were going to his tomb to take the perfumes, how were they going to get in?
Were they going to get in the tomb to put the fragrances on him, or were they just going to put them outside the tomb?
Oh, I don't know that.
So basically, she's saying, how would the women have moved
Or were
the
like
rock?
the Romans going to be like,
Were the Romans going to do
That's
it for
cool.
them? So that
we got it.
Maybe they were planning on asking the Roman guards to roll the tomb open for them so they could do that. Maybe they were planning on just waiting outside the tomb, putting something outside the tomb. That's a good question, but no, that's a good question.
I thought there might have been like.
I don't think there is.
I have never heard of an explanation. I have heard that used as evidence for the resurrection, saying that, well, women can't move the stone, you know what I mean? But, you also have to be careful with tradition. So, when you look at Bible stories and you look at certain images, you picture this humongous stone, right? That's this tall, and who's to say it wasn't a stone that was this tall?
And apparently a rolling one.
Well, Jordan has a picture of the actual one, and from the picture, it doesn't look like it's huge.
Yeah.
So,
And maybe they would have some servants with them, and they just didn't mention that, like, because that wasn't important. Like, they brought people to move the stone, but that wasn't important in the story.
maybe. So, they show up. The tomb is empty, right? Could someone have come in the night and stole the body? Well, if you have Roman guards there, the Roman guards aren't going to just randomly be sleeping on the job, right? These guards know if they let somebody like do something with his body, that's them that's going to be on the cross next. You know what I'm saying?
I have another question.
Mhm.
So, how do I say it? Like, how did they know that there wasn't a body in there? Like, if they were on guard and they didn't just like fall asleep and Jesus didn't move the stone, he just kind of like disappeared out of the tomb.
The stone was moved.
The stones, how did they not, why didn't they see that?
The angel came and it like.
Distracted them?
You're asking how the guards.
Yeah, why didn't the guards see?
The guards were asleep. Now, the concept here is that the angel put them to sleep.
Gotcha.
Because,
I just went on educated, so I didn't know that.
no, it's a great question. And the argument for that, or to back that up, is that there had to be some external cause for the Roman guards to fall asleep. because they know, like I said, their life is on the line. They're not going to fall asleep. You know what I mean? If me and you are guarding the tomb and I'm getting really sleepy, I'm going to be like, man, Emmy, you're going to have to watch it for a couple hours because.
And we're guarding it for a reason. Not
Yeah.
just like, we guard every tomb, you know. Like,
Right. Yeah.
Gotta keep our eyes peeled.
Yep.
Maybe they just passed out. I know.
Maybe they need some
During
caffeine.
during that little small window, the Jews who were in hiding, his followers who were in hiding, just all came out of the bushes and moved the stone and stole the body.
Yep. So, would the disciples have stole the body? What would they have to gain from that? And then, if they stole the body and went on to proclaim that he rose from the dead, what would they have to gain from that? Because at that point, they know it's a lie. And so they're risking their life because of a lie? Something they know is a lie? But you know it's a lie. And okay, I know what you all are going to say. Well, don't Muslims do that? Aren't they willing to die for a lie? Yeah, but they don't know it's a lie. Muslims don't know Islam is a lie. They believe it's true, right? These disciples knew, they would have known that they had the body, right? Because if they were the ones that stole it, which is what they were being accused of, if they actually did steal it, well, they're going to know that Jesus is dead.
Somebody would have crumbled and fessed up out of that one.
Yeah.
And they were like already in hiding and like being kind of like scared about everything until they were inspired by the fact that he came back to life.
Okay, so I don't know if y'all are showing this because I was looking up this about the guards. It says in Matthew 28, I didn't think it was just like that they fell asleep. It said that his appearance was like lightning and his clothes were white as snow. The guards were so afraid of him that they shook and became like dead men. So like they passed out probably. Like
Did they remember?
they were so scared they passed out.
See, we need to research this after.
Okay, gotcha.
They put him to sleep.
You're going to have follow-up questions.
They made him go night-night.
No.
It's like,
Great that you want to know.
Came ready as a
Golly, question.
We can do it after the
all right, so Paul was transformed, all right? Paul started out persecuting Christians. He becomes a missionary after the encounter. Now, remember this, Paul did not walk with Jesus prior to the resurrection. So Paul's out here persecuting Christians. He had his Roman road transformation after Jesus rose from the dead. Okay? So explain to me how this transformation happened if Jesus really didn't rise from the dead. I mean, Paul was on up there. He was good with the Romans, right? He is respected. He's got the rule of the roost, right? Like he can do what he wants. He has money. He's out here persecuting Christians. Why is it that Paul radically changes and starts following Jesus after the resurrection? The only logical explanation is that it's because it really happened, because he really saw the risen Jesus. James, the half-brother of Jesus. All right, this is another transformation that happened. He's initially skeptic, right? I would be too. If my sibling claimed to be God, later leads the church in Jerusalem, willfully suffers persecution. And you got to keep in mind, Paul and James were martyred. They died because they died claiming that Jesus was the Messiah.
How many, I don't remember, how many of the disciples died from being martyred?
I got a book on that.
I know there's.
It's a good book.
No, I can't remember what it.
Sean McDowell wrote a book. I don't remember the name of it off the top of my head, but I got it at the house. It's actually less, you often hear that people say all the disciples were persecuted. Well, that's not the case. They may have been. We just don't have evidence of that claim. But we do have evidence of a few of them that were persecuted and died, that were martyred. So I know Peter was, or we have good evidence that Peter was, good evidence that James was and Paul was, and I don't remember the other ones off the top of my head. So, what's that? We could do, I've said this for a couple of years now, we need to do a Bible study on that. Just studying each of the disciples, their life, their impact on the ministry. So what explains James's transformation? I mean, James would really, like, if that's your half brother and you're questioning it, you would really have to see something drastic to make you be like, all right, I believe you. So what are some objections to the resurrection? Hallucinations. You guys have heard this before probably. Well, the disciples were just hallucinating when they thought they saw Jesus. Have you guys ever heard this? Mm-mm.
Some that have heard it, they were like, when they were in hiding, they were eating and stuff, and they were just, oh, that's what I've heard before. And because of that, they were just like on wit ends, and they were just hallucinating the fact that.
Yeah. Yeah, they wanted it to be true. Yeah.
I can see that. I can see how people would say that.
So, really? Group appearances present a problem. And then you still have the problem of the fact that the tomb is empty. And then you still have to deal with the fact that Paul and James have an unusual transformation. Now, you could say, well, even Paul and James hallucinated this. But here's the deal. Like, if you think about, there's, 5 of us adults in this room right now, okay? Think about something that we all hallucinate and imagine we see in here at the same time, and we report it the same way. What are the odds of that? Slim to none. Now you take the disciples in different locations at different times that are hallucinating and saying the same thing. It's more likely that Jesus is the Messiah than it is that all these people were hallucinating the same thing at the same time. That just doesn't happen. Okay? There is actually a documentary, I don't remember if it was, I don't remember who it was. I don't remember if it was Lee Strobel or who it was interviewing I want to say it was a psychiatrist. And the it was about the hallucinations. Like, hey, what's the likelihood of these guys hallucinating the same thing at the same time? And then basically they said the same thing. It was like, it's more probable that he actually rose from the dead than everybody hallucinating, seeing the same thing.
I mean, think about telephone. You can say it, and we're all trying to say that maybe we came up with it, said that, or we hallucinated it, we all came up with a lie ourselves. Because it's a lie, it's still not going to line up. There's going to be some things that are going to be different from the same. If we all left here and said, like, just us 5, and said, here's a lie, we're going to leave here with this lie, it's going to get messed up here or there.
Somebody's going to forget a detail.
Like, but if we all witnessed it, it's going to be a little more, there's going to be a little more founding truth there because it's like an eyewitness of the account personally.
And not to mention, it would have to happen multiple times.
Yeah.
The disciples saw Jesus more than once post-resurrection. And so they would have to hallucinate multiple times and believe it so much so that they were willing to go to, they were willing to die for it. Yeah, good points.
I feel like somebody would have just used the tomb though, if it wasn't true. Like, why would Joseph not just be like, oh, okay, body's gone, my family turns back, like, let's use it. Like, why would it be empty thousands of years later?
Oh, yeah, I see what you're saying. Because there's a significant,
Right.
yeah.
Somebody would have gone and used it.
Mm-hmm.
At some point. And so there'd be somebody's bones there, but there's nothing.
Yep, that's a good point. So the stolen body theory, okay? We talked about this a little bit. Problems with this are disciples don't gain anything. They don't gain power and praise and money from stealing the body and then promoting this lie, okay? And it's, even today, it's not like we gain a lot of worldly things when we become a Christian. I mean, if you think about it, if we're talking strictly worldly things, which is what money and power are, right? You can really, okay, here's how we'll narrow this down. You can narrow down the majority of sins to sex, money, and power. Somehow. One of those three things. Okay? Or your sin is related to one of those three things. Okay? Now, like sex, money, and power are not inherently bad things. However, we make them bad things through our sin, right? These guys didn't have any of that to gain by stealing the body. And it's hard to explain their willingness to die after they stole the body. So we're going to move on past that. I think we beat that into a pulp. Legend. Have you guys heard this before? Well, it's just a legend that happened over time, that built up over time, that Jesus rose from the dead. It didn't really happen. It just, over a long period of 2,000 years, it has become a legend. The problem with legends is legends take time to develop. A legend does not occur overnight. Okay, that is not the definition of a legend. A legend takes years to develop, okay? Years and years and years. If we look at 1 Corinthians 15, 3 through 8, which happens extremely early in the life of Jesus, post-resurrection. For I delivered to you as of the first importance what I also received, that Christ died for our sins in accordance with the Scriptures, that he was buried, that he raised on the third day in accordance with the Scriptures, and then he appeared to Cephas, then to 12. Then he appeared to more than 500 brothers at one time, most of whom are still alive, though some have fallen asleep. Then he appeared to James, then to all apostles. Last of all, as to one untimely born, he appeared also to me. So Paul is saying that, he was untimely born, but he appeared to him also. So here we have an early account of Paul writing this, and Paul is claiming that even then, at that time, that Jesus was crucified, he was buried, and he rose on the third day. And we have other eyewitnesses here who are still alive. That's something that I think we don't point out enough in the church, is that Scripture, we're always good at taking Scripture and trying to apply it to our lives. Which Scripture does say that, all Scripture is good for preaching and teaching, right? But with teaching comes keeping it in context and showing the historical side of it. And if you look at a lot of what the disciples were claiming, especially the four gospel writers, they were very careful in their writing. They weren't just sitting down on a, rainy day and just writing carefree. I mean, if you look at the Gospels, how they're written down, they were very careful in their writing. They were very careful in the accounts. They were very careful in the dates, the genealogy. They were very careful in everything they did, which is further testament to the accuracy of them, right? I mean, if you look here how Paul is writing, does this look like he's just writing a fiction story? Or does this come off to you as a historical account, right? He's saying, okay, he died, He raised on the third day, according to the scriptures. So he's referencing that this was prophecy. That he appeared to Cephas, then to 12. He's going in order. Then he appeared to more than 500 at one time. Some of those are dead, but some of them are still alive. Then he appeared to James, and then to all the apostles, and then last of all, he appeared to me. This is Paul writing this. So he's not just being careless when he's writing this, right? He's being very careful in how he writes it, this account. That's not, the reason this is not legend is because this was very early. Okay, legends take years and years to start to form. The wrong tomb. What if Jesus was just buried in the wrong, what if they had the tomb wrong, right? What if Jesus was over there in the hills and they all think he was buried here? Well, the problem with that is we can still go see where the tomb that he was buried in today. Authorities could have checked. Joseph was a member of the Jewish high court, so he knew where the tomb was, right? It's not like it was accidental mix-up with the tombs. The movement began in Jerusalem. If the disciples accidentally went to the wrong tomb, the mistake could have been corrected very easily. So in summary, the historical evidence strongly supports that Jesus did in fact die by crucifixion. That the tomb was empty. The disciples genuinely believed that they saw him. And the skeptics, including some of the followers of Jesus, well, including the followers of Jesus, were transformed. They were skeptics. They're transformed after the resurrection, and now they're following him, willing to die for him. All right. It's not just an idea. It presents the best explanation for the historical facts. Okay, if we're looking at this as historical events and facts that took place, the best explanation is he rose from the dead. All right? Does anybody have any questions about that? If Jesus really did rise from the dead, and I think he did based off of what we just went through, what does that